Good evening, gentlemen. Michael, Cam, and Anurag are here in our continuing dialogos on the series of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis by John Vervaeke. So today we are going to be covering episodes 30 and 31, which are getting close to the heart of relevance realization. The episode 30 is about relevance realization and the dynamical systems theory. And the episode 31 is about the embodied, embedded nature of relevance realization as a dynamical development of general intelligence. Mouthful, but very, very interesting. So Cam, how are you doing this evening? You want to kick us off with the episode 30?
I am. I'm well, thank you. And I'll just open with appreciation. Like I'm very grateful that I get the opportunity to practice with you guys and bow in humility to those who have gone before and your own wisdom. Okay, so this is episode 31. So the last time we were taking a look at trying to progress in an attempt to give at least a plausible suggestion, a scientific theory of how we could explain relevance realization. And one of the things we examined was the distinction between a theory of relevance and a theory of relevance realization. And I made the argument that we cannot have a scientific theory of relevance precisely because of a lack of systematic import. But we can have a theory of relevance realization. And then I gave you the analogy of that, which I'm building towards something stronger than an analogy, of Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection, and that in which Darwin proposed a virtual engine that regulates the reproductive cycle so that the system constantly evolves the biological fittedness of organisms to a constantly changing environment. And then the analogy is that there is a virtual engine in the embodied brain, and why it's an embodied embedded brain will become clear in this lecture. But there is a virtual engine that regulates the sensory motor loop so that my cognitive interactional fittedness is constantly being shaped. It's constantly evolving to deal with a constantly changing environment. And what I, in fact, need, as I argued, is a system of constraints because I'm trying between selective and enabling constraints, to limit and zero in on relevant information. And then I was trying to argue that the way in which that operates, we saw, needs to be sort of related to an autopoietic system. And then the way that operates, the self-organization, I suggested, operates in terms of a design that you see in many scales. And we need, remember, a multi-scalular theory in terms of your biological and cognitive organization. And that's in terms of opponent processing. And we took a look at the opponent processing within the autonomic nervous system that is constantly, by this strong analogy, evolving your level of arousal to the environment, opposing goals, but interrelated function. Then I proposed to you that we could look for the kinds of properties that we're going to be talking about, the level at which we're going to be pitching a theory of relevance realization, which is the theory of bioeconomic properties that are operating not according to normativity of truth or validity, not logical normativity, but logistical normativity. And the two most important logistical norms I would propose to you are efficiency and resiliency. And then I made an argument that they would be susceptible to opponent processing precisely because they are in a trade-off relationship with each other. And that if we could get a cognitive virtual engine that regulates the sensory motor loop by systematically playing off selective constraints on efficiency, selective logistical economic constraints on efficiency, and enabling economic constraints on resiliency, then we could give an explanation, a theory deeply analogous to Darwin's theory of the evolution across individuals of biological fittedness. We could give an account of the cognitive evolution within individuals' cognition of their cognitive interactional fittedness, the way they are shaping the problem space so as to adaptively be well fitted to achieving their interactional goals with the environment. That's a mouthful.
Yep.
Amazing summary. Masterclass in how to summarize a really complex, sophisticated set of ideas in a few words or a few paragraphs. So, Michael, what do you think? You want to react to that? What you took away from that episode?
Well, there's a number of things that he brought up that were very interesting in this. Is that what he argued initially was that and we talked about this last time to some degree, is you actually can't come up with a theory of relevance in terms of how it happens, but you can come up with a theory that explains. I mean, the mechanisms we don't know, right? He says we just don't know, and the typical ways of trying to explain things actually depend on relevance to explain them. So therefore, you can't do it that way. But what you can do is you can track how relevance works, and explain that part. In other words, we don't really know how it works in the brain exactly. We know it's multiple systems of the brain, but we do know that it does happen. So we're going to explore that part, is what he says, I think pretty clearly. And so, yeah, the process of realizing relevance is what he explores, rather than the mechanisms specifically in the brain or whatever of relevance development, or kind of how it all happens. Although it's kind of interesting, because what I study in polyvagal theory gives a little bit more insight to how that works. But we still don't know exactly how it works in the nervous system. So let's see. And then, he also, let's see here. Self-organizing, autopoietic. So the other part that he's explaining that I think is really important is that I don't know if he says this explicitly, but almost everything he's talking about actually happens on a subconscious level initially, right? The other thing that I see coming up over and over is how McGilchrist's left-right brain functions show up all the time in here, constantly, and more so in the next chapter, by the way. So let's see here. I just reread this, and I guess I'm not too sharp today.
That's okay.
Okay. So I just got through that part. He says that we're not going to talk about the theory of relevance because we can't. We can only talk about the theory of relevance realization. And then he's talking. This was another interesting part of this chapter that I thought was intriguing, is how things are categorized. They have to have quite a number of things that properties that are similar, essences, as he calls them. Because he said, look, you can't, things that are white are not similar enough just from that to be able to categorize them into a meaning structure. But he says, when they, gold elements in gold, you can say that there's certain things that are similar to that, or metals are the same for certain reasons, right? But you can't do that. Relevance is not something that comes from that measurement. He says it comes from the relationship between, I believe, your goal or what you're trying to achieve, and the environment itself, which then changes constantly. And I think that's what he's going to explain more later, is how it depends on what you're aiming at, more or less, to what's relevant to you right now, right? And it can change in 2 seconds. That's my understanding. Yeah. It says that scientific categories meaning they have to support broad, reliable generalizations. I thought that was very interesting. to even have that emphasized. Have to be homogeneous to some degree, right? And that meaning doesn't work like that. Yeah, so that works with things like gold and so on, but not for meaning. So let's see what else we got here. Oh, he also said that it's not systematic. This is interesting. What makes things relevant is not intrinsic to the objects, but depends on their relation to us.
That is why he says that you cannot have a theory of relevance.
Right.
Not because of you can't explain the mechanisms, but he's saying because it is inherently contextual to what we are seeking and what the environment is making available. So just like with theory of evolution, you can have a theory and the process and why the process and the mechanism works, but how a particular fittedness happens in a given context between a particular animal and the environment, there is no theory for that fittedness, only of the process by which evolution happens and the fittedness is found.
Yeah, fittedness is found in the moment, right? In the response.
Because of the fact that it's transjective. It's like both have to come together. It's not inherent in the animal and it's not inherent in the environment.
But it's as McGilchrist says, it's the encounter.
Yeah.
Right. And he loves that word, by the way. Okay, and that, like he's as money as but it's a good one, right? He's as money as an example of how the only reason money has value is because we agree that it has value. It's not inherently valuable. It depends on the context. So anyway, and then fittedness, of course, you just actually just explained that part. What does he call cognitive interactional fittedness? How our thinking and problem solving adapt to our environment. That's pretty well stated. And then, okay, so then this is the other interesting thing that he brings up here, and then he talks about more the next time, is the balance between efficiency and resilience. I thought this was really interesting, because what I notice he does in this chapter and then expands in the next chapter is he explores the whole concept of opponent processing in all these different categories.
Yeah.
And how that's the fun. This is, I never really realized this till I read this. It's the fundamental aspect of all our systems of cognition, is that there's always a trade-off, right, between efficiency or, like general, because efficiency is more generalized, or specific, which is high cost. So, and this is also that slow and fast thinking brain stuff, which is again is left, right brain from McGilchrist, is that when you are attending to the world in a broad sense, you actually can't see details. But when you see details, you can't see the broad picture. So what McGilchrist talks about, and this is what he's talking about here, as far as I understand it, is that we were designed that way as animals, because we had to do both things. Like and actually it is capable for some animals to have their brain aware of the, on one side of the brain is aware of what's happening around them, and the other side is looking for a seed on the ground. But I think that's a very interesting thing to ponder, is how you have to, this is part of why relevance is so critical, is because you have to know what mode to be in and what way to attend if you want to be effective at reaching your goal, or being effectively, we call it resilient or adaptable, is my takeaway on that. So I thought that was helpful. Anyway, you guys thoughts about all that? Did I miss something that you thought was really super?
I think we're going around and trying to just highlight what struck before we jump into a conversation.
Oh, okay, sure.
So I'm just going to ask Cam what are the salient points he wants to bring up, and then we can have a conversation around it if he chooses to.
I'd be happy to. So what stood out for me, there were a number of them where I overlapped with Michael. So I'm just going to start to narrow the dialogue right now. and focus on those, I think. So I'm going to go back to the word that I stumbled over in the reading, which is the multiscalular. So he says, well, I lost it now, but the idea, we started to talk about it at the end of our last dialogue, where I introduced that idea of there's this oscillation in sense of identity. So I think in some previous episode, Vervaeke talks about the inseparability of identity and purpose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then in as I was listening to you, Michael, you drew attention to the point that two things in particular. One, how things are categorized. You started to get into that. And then you made the point about the opponent processing occurring at like multi scales. Like it's a trade-off at all scales. So that is another way of saying that maybe is within all categories. You've got a trade-off between I think ultimately he gets to the idea, well, he's doing it on an economic basis. So there's an economic basis,
Right.
but then it's an economy. At what scale? Which economy are you talking about? Are you talking about the economy at the atomic scale, at the molecular scale, the biological scale, the biological individual scale, the societal scale, planetary scale? You can parse it however you like. But
I think also the economics is a trade-off between risk, high energy output risk, or efficiency. I mean, it's like this is the other thing. That's the economy he's talking about, is that sometimes it's better to focus on one, like going to college and focus on one subject so you can go to have a job. But while you're doing that, you can't study all these other things, and you can't party with your friends as much, or whatever it is. There's always some sort of trade-off, and you just got to hope that the one that you're focusing on is the best one to focus on. That's my takeaway.
Well, I hope that we're doing. I don't know who said it, but hope is not a strategy. I'm hoping to play strategically here, and yes, hope is important, but I can also deploy a reasonable, rational, intelligent strategy in trying to get better at that all of the time. One of the other trade-off relationships that he calls out that had stood out to me was the explore trade-off. You guys remember that one?
Yeah,
that one really stood out to me.
Yep,
I think that's probably. Oh, one last thing, and then I'd love to hear what you have to say, Anu. For some reason, and I don't really know why, I got a few intuitions, but reaching back an episode or so, when he talked about the salience tagging, you guys remember that? The here-ness, nowness, like you have this capacity to say, here now, here now, here now, here now. And I thought of that again when you were talking about the dependency on what you're aiming at. So if I'm aiming to keep making sure that the board is here next to me, it sets up an affirmative, there's a positive feedback loop there. And it feels comforting in some sense, because I know that it's here now, here now, here now, but then I'm also not reaching, and if that becomes completely unconscious and becomes habitual, then I'm not doing the exploratory move. I'm continuing to exploit the known or more recent relationship, affirming it.
Affirming it, yeah.
So that's the salience tagging. Okay, that's enough word salad out of me. What do you think, Anurag?
I want to bring us back to the central idea of this episode, which was dynamical system theory.
Okay.
And he's trying to anchor relevance realization by looking at the constructs of the theory that are found outside of psychology. So that's why he starts with example of dynamical system theory in evolution. right? Evolutionary. So dynamical system theory is an abstract set of theory that can be applied to any complex environment, right? Whether you can talk about economy, you can talk about states and actors, and at some level, you can just say it's a generalized theory of how complex systems, dynamic systems interact in physics. But what he is doing is very specific, and his scope is much narrower. He's not talking about in generalities. He's talking about what we can learn from complex dynamical theory in physics, which is where, or complex systems, and apply it to his task, which is how human beings make realize relevance of what they're doing. So first of all, I want to kind of come back and focus in on that, because otherwise it's all too easy to kind of fade away into all these other abstractions, which might or might not be applicable. And that's why he's very clear about 2 or 3 aspects of the theory. And if you understand the theory, then you can see how he's applying it selectively. First is that in a dynamical system theory, the interactions matter among the parts rather than, like, that's a very, the whole equilibrium comes from the interaction. That's why he's saying, like, it's agent-arena relationship. That's why it's transjective, and how, to Michael's point, how you bring intention, and that goal that determines what's relevant to you. And in return, what the constraints the system puts on you determines what you can do with it. So he's basically trying to bring that theory. What's interesting is that he uses 3 examples. One is, of course, we talked about at length about the evolution example, but also he uses the autonomous nervous system example, where he talks about the 2 complex systems, the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems, and how they are in opponent processing, and how one reduces arousal, other instigates it, and how, based on the environment, those 2 have to balance each other out. And he generalizes that to say, okay, so when you look at dynamical system theory and what trade-offs these systems make, whether it's parasympathetic, sympathetic system, or whether it's evolutionary system, or even economic system, that's where he extracts the principle he wants to apply. That's it. And the principle he's applying is trade-off between efficiency and resilience. And what's interesting, worth spending time on, is that he has very precise definitions of resilience.
He sure does.
And he has a very precise definition of efficiency, particularly when it comes to the cognitive apparatus and the psychology he's talking about. So he's not talking about efficiency in economy or in the marketplace. He's saying, you know, if you are going to pay attention to it, efficiency is, can you have a most, and maybe we reserve this conversation for the next episode where he goes a lot deeper into it. But I think he's describing a trade-off. He's extracted a principle from system dynamical theory, and he's applying it to explain a new principle of relevance realization. And he's saying at the heart, it is the agent and the arena, we the human beings as agents, and the arena as the environment we find it. And what we're trying to do is figure out what the right opponent processing is. And he's calling that efficiency resilience trade-off, right? That to me is at the heart of all of this chapter. Because if we agree on that mechanism, and then he says that that mechanism has to be, like you were saying, subsemantic, to your point, Michael, subconscious, not just simply what you can put meaning on. Subsyntactic, like even can be much more expressed, not in symbols. Self-organizing, autopoietic, and multi-scale, meaning it has to be able to happen in the moment, in the day, in the lifetime. So it's like, it's an ever-cascading scope. So then he is just basically setting up relevance realization and as a dynamic system. That's my explanation of what he's trying to get to in this particular episode. Next episode, this is a setup for the next episode where he goes in a lot more detail around what it means to have such opponent processing embodied in ourselves. And then he goes a lot more detail around application of this idea.
Okay,
That's,
so just to go right back to the title, it's embodied, embedded relevance realization as dynamical developmental general intelligence.
That's the chapter we are about to discuss. That's not the one we just
Yeah,
discussed.
the one we were discussing is awakening relevance realization meets dynamical system theory.
Exactly. Exactly. Right.
Okay,
So
so
you
the
summarized from 31 the
got it.
outcome. That's why.
Yeah.
Meets dynamical systems theory. Okay, so we're about halfway through our allotted time this evening. How
So
would
I
you
guess we
like
should
to?
hop to the next one, right?
Sure. I think if you can summarize the gist of the episode 32, which is, sorry, 31, I stand corrected, which is the embodied, embedded relevance realization, right? Which builds upon this idea that he has extracted from the dynamical theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the summary, I am going to read right from the end of episode 31. He says, relevance realization is your general intelligence. I'm arguing that your general intelligence can be understood as a dynamic development evolution of your sensory motor fittedness that is regulated by virtual engines that are ultimately regulated by the logistical normativity of the opponent processing between efficiency and resiliency.
There's a mouthful.
So that, I mean, we could probably spend the rest of the time this evening just trying to unpack that.
Yeah.
And say, okay, what does that really mean?
The
What
whole
does that
episode
mean?
is just on that.
That's out of, I'm almost on the last page of the transcript from episode 31. Is that what you wanted me to do?
You wanted to summarize 31, right? To kick us off?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that,
Okay.
to me, that's a pretty succinct summary.
So let me comment on this particular episode since I spent a time on this. So I think in this episode, what he's doing is applying that dynamical theory insight. And now, as I took away, what's interesting to me was that he applies it to two or three things. He applies it to what he calls internal systems that we have and external systems that the environment has. And what he's doing is saying, this is where he defines very clearly what it means to have efficiency is that you have certain ability to general purpose ability to solve many problems. That's efficient because you now know if you have it's like I know a trick, I know a pattern, and I can now apply that to a lot of problems. That's efficient. And then resilience, however, is that you find yourself a problem where that pattern doesn't apply. But then you have to be very specific and you have to customize your understanding of a very specific situation because you need to be resilient to a unique situation, unique information that showed up. So using McGilchrist, if you want the sense of the whole, then some general purpose method that you might have, what he would call would be efficient method, would apply. But when you want to become very specific and very precise in controlling the environment or making sure of what's relevant from the environment in a unique situation, then you have to become resilient. And then you have to pay a lot more attention to the details, not just the whole. And that trade-off is what he calls the efficiency resilience trade-off.
That's right.
And he posits it in informational sense. He says, like when you are abstracting a lot of general things out of the patterns you're seeing, you are becoming very efficient. But when you're becoming very, very specific and you're creating very specific patterns of understanding and picking up details, then that you're becoming resilient. And those two, he thinks, are in opponent processing. Any thoughts and reaction to that?
Yeah,
No,
so well, go ahead, Michael.
Oh no, go ahead. You jumped right in.
So the thing that occurred to me, so in the evolve move play practices that I'm working with, well, I'm currently going through a series of practices on vaults and specifically vaults over rails. So like handicap rails, just handrails basically. And there's some fences here locally that are in my ordinary walking routine out here. And what I noticed, it actually I did it inside an office building today. There was a handicap rail, and I'm heavy duty thinking. I'm walking through the office and I'm trying to solve problems mentally, and then I see this rail and I'm like, okay, I'm imagining that this is an instance of particularization now. So I'm gonna adapt. I'm trying to solve problems in a general sense, like I'm trying to move across domains just in the mental space. And now all of a sudden I'm shifting the attention to this rail and moving my body over it in an efficient manner right there in that one little context. And I go and I can imagine the move. Like I've been studying the technique, I've been trying it in different places, but all with rails. And I can imagine the steps, the moves, and the first attempt, it's not complete failure, but it's basically a failure. It's like, oh, I thought my body was going to move this way over. I thought this leg was going to go first, and no, it doesn't work. And I noticed this collapsing, it feels like, of attention, where the second time through, it's there. So even though I can see it before I attempt that first move, it doesn't happen. The body doesn't respond as anticipated. But after that gripping, grabbing, attempting, moving, interacting with the arena, with the body, so experiencing the actual, the real relationship, not the one I imagined, but experiencing in an embodied manner the real relationship, there's a shift. And then I'm able to be successful moving over the feature.
Yeah. Michael, you have reactions to this whole efficiency?
Well, yeah, I thought your summary was excellent, Anurag, by the way. Like I said before, there's this, he comes up with all these different examples of opponent processing. So relevance detection versus relevance projection, for example. And then objective and subjective, right?
Yes.
Efficiency and resilience, internal and external properties. Okay, wait, so the general purpose and special purpose. So this was helpful. The general purpose is like a hand that can perform many tasks, but isn't the best at any specific one. Specific purpose is like what you would use a hammer for.
Yeah.
And that's the two types of processing, right? He also calls it compression and particularization. That's the other interesting.
That's the process.
Yeah, it's the process. But I also think the other part that he brings up that I was absolutely tickled that he brought this out was the embodied, the fact that that cognition doesn't just happen in the brain. And this is something that I learned from polyvagal theory, and I was, it's just such a mind blower because we actually have a lot of neurological tissue in our gut, which is what usually makes decisions for us about emotional response to the world, among other things. So that I really, what does he call it? See, bodies. Yeah, I like this. Our bodies are not just vessels for our minds. They are autopoietic bioeconomies, essentially for ongoing relevance realization. I thought that was really great. Without our bodies, we wouldn't have the machinery needed for evolving relevance realization. I totally agree with that. This is one of the Cartesian errors that are massive, is that they think that if you cut the head off the body and had it by itself, that it could still think properly. I don't think so. I think if they ever get that far, they're going to be very disappointed. Because there's going to be it may function, but there'll be all the stuff missing. It's going to be ugly. Be like one of those sci-fi horror films where they discover that, oh, that doesn't work. Anyway, and anything else? Oh, and yeah, the discussion of general intelligence I thought was fascinating. Wow, like it's funny because I don't think I ever really realized what that meant.
So
Right. Until I saw his diagrams, and then he showed it how it relates to relevance realization.
yeah,
I mean, how
yeah,
it's the same thing, really.
yeah, feeds it.
And I thought, and then of course the whole discussion about how they figured, well, AI scientists ran into this right away. They're like, the AI can't make decisions unless you tell it what's important.
Yeah.
I thought
That's
that was
why
fantastic.
AGI,
Right.
the GI, general intelligence part is still a fantasy
Yeah.
in AGI, in the world of AI. If I may comment on what you just said, Michael, and tied to
Sure.
what Cam had said earlier, which when you were giving the example of evolve, move, play, is that the two things which I found very interesting. One was this idea that when you are in the explore stage, which is being efficient. See, he says when you are exploring, like you are generally looking at the terrain and you're exploring, you are expanding your errors. You are not necessarily reducing your errors. You don't mind a lot of mistakes because you're just being efficient and you want to just scan and understand, which is the same as later on he calls, integrate the information, right?
Yeah.
You are just assimilating, just integration. And then he says the opposite of that is exploit, when you want to reduce the errors and you become very resilient and very precise. And that's when you differentiate. So many of these concepts, assimilation versus accommodation, which is from Piaget, psychological theory, with information and physics theory of integration versus differentiation, right? How do you take something and combine it? And how do you take something and break it into pieces? And then this whole idea of particularization and what he calls, generalization, explore, exploit, error reduction, error expansion. He's tying together multiple concepts, the pairs of concepts from multiple sciences into explaining this.
So I'd like to
mechanism.
slow you down there a little bit because I don't think I picked that up. So you're saying that he made the point that the exploratory mode was the efficient mode.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's because it's not, you're not
you're not
taking something
particularizing.
apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just scanning, and it's kind of like, if you skimmed a bunch of movies on Netflix to see which one you want to watch, right? And then when you watch it, then that's where
Exactly.
you're
Exactly.
actually studying it, so to speak.
Exploiting it.
Or
Yeah,
even
explore
exploited.
versus exploit. Exploit is when I start extracting meaning and effort, and I'm
you
more
spend the
bound
time
to
to watch the movie.
Yes.
You
Yes.
Because it's like
explore
dating.
all the
It's like
thumbnails.
you date,
Yeah.
well, you don't get to know the person really well because that
Yeah.
takes time, and then you choose one and then you exploit.
Yeah.
Which is a terrible way to say it.
Yeah. But that's why he's using these metaphors or pairwise metaphors from different sciences. Like
Yes.
integrate versus differentiate, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. This
the right brain seeing whole, left brain grasping the parts.
grasping, organizing, discerning, right? That's
Yeah.
and categorizing, and so on.
So to me, the kicker was he describes this in multiple ways. And then he says the process of complexification is emergent. Things become more complex as you continue down this path. Both sides become more complex.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not a linear
yeah.
process. It's not just you do it. With every kind of turn of the screw, so to speak, there's deeper binding and deeper realization and unfolding that never finishes. And that's where the complexification comes in, according to him.
So they're saying, so as you go along, as you evolve, is that what
Exactly.
you mean?
As you evolve,
Yeah.
systems become more complex because you are increasingly bound better and better. And you become now more and more resonant to how you explore, exploit, how you integrate, differentiate.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you're bound more?
Bound as in the process itself has a trajectory. And the trajectory is that of evolution/complexification.
Okay. Is that, I'm going to be a little bit provocative here if you'll allow me.
Of course.
Is that
I'm just
something like everlasting life?
I'm not sure he
I
goes
don't
that
think he
far.
goes that far with
All
I
that.
he's
know he
saying is
doesn't.
the process
I'm
is
going that
eternal. The
far.
process is never ending. That's all.
Well, I mean, you could extrapolate that as a potential, because that's obviously what evolution is, right? I mean, it's going towards a more complex, more refined level of being, right? That's my interpretation of what evolution is. So where is that going to end up? Well, we don't know. Or how has it ended up in certain ways in the universe that we're not aware of? Good question.
Yeah.
But it's obviously the structure of reality is, and as we know it, is in that's the rhythm that is ever present in evolution, I would
The
say.
point is, it's an open system. Again,
Yeah.
using dynamical theory. In a dynamical theory, if the system is closed, it can only do so much of it, and then it shuts down or reaches entropy. The way he's describing it is an open-ended system. Relevance realization doesn't have a goal at the end, which you say is, oh, I reached this realization and I'm done. Right? It doesn't
It
have
doesn't
that.
have a goal, but it does have the consequence of ever increasing complexity.
And
So
refinement towards a higher level of something.
and that is what he's building
Yeah.
towards much, much later, few episodes later, when he talks about this as an eternal process. That's what he means. But at this point, he's just tying together the pieces of the machinery for us.
Well, what's interesting is I don't know if he does this, but I can see how he could tie that into a spiritual orientation.
Well, he does. He does
He does.
explicitly,
Oh, I
I
see.
think, in the
He
next
does.
episode.
So
Yeah.
as above, so below. Here
Yeah.
we go. Right?
Yeah.
That makes. Oh, I didn't really see that coming.
He's
For
getting
some
there.
reason.
He's getting there.
That's great.
So that's why it's so important that we slow down in these episodes, because in every episode from now on, he's basically building the pieces of the machinery and explaining why each of these pieces of machinery came together to him.
Right.
Yeah, I think somewhere along the way he explicitly says, I forget exactly how it says, I can probably find it here, but he basically says, like what you're saying, Anurag, like if you carefully do this, if you come up with the naturalistic, that is to say, scientifically approached description of the process of relevance realization, it puts you in a position where you can integrate it with human spirituality.
Exactly
Right.
right.
Okay, that
Well
makes
said.
sense.
Exactly right.
Well, not to mention that I would argue that there's no difference between the two. And ultimately, right? I mean, if
he's trying to reclaim it. He's trying to reclaim it from what you would call a belief systems, religious belief systems, and he's trying to anchor it in the scientific basis. And that's why he's drawing all these examples from system dynamical theory, from different opponent processing, from all the various venues. He's bringing it together.
Okay, that makes sense. That's and that's coherent. That's very coherent.
He's laying a lot of ground.
Yeah, I mean it feels that way. I mean, it's a lot, because you're like all these. I've looked up a lot of terms. Like I looked up objective aspect, subjective aspect, transjective relationship. Because I read. I was like, what the hell is he talking about?
Can you expand? Do you feel like you have some
so
understanding?
Objective aspect is when we talk about realization in the objective way, it means making something real. For example, if you have an idea for a treehouse and then you actually build it, you're making the idea real. Subjective aspect, when we talk about realization in a subjective way, it means becoming aware of something. For example, if you're looking for your missing toy and then suddenly remember you left it in the backyard, you become aware of where it is. And then there's relevance realization. This is about figuring out what is important and relevant to us in different situations, right? It involves both making real, objective, and becoming aware, subjective. It's like when you're solving a puzzle, you both put the pieces together, making it real and recognizing which piece fits where, becoming aware. And then transjective, this is a big word that means it's a mix of both, your mind and the world working together. Just like how playing catch involves both you and your friend, relevance realization involves both you thinking and the things around you. So that's what we had already discussed before, but it was helpful for me. I mean, I was thinking I could have dived deep like this in about a dozen places in the last episode, and I just didn't have time. But I find that helpful. And I think, I mean, one of the things I'm still the biggest kind of interest I have is how does one apply it?
Yeah.
And I think that, of course, that's what we're getting more closer to him, more detail about what that would be. But because Cam, what you brought up, I thought was really good, is you're talking about, there's an action you're taking in your life, a focus, which is you're trying to learn how to creatively move through your environment. So you're having this experience of actually application, right? Which I think is really important. I mean, I've actually noticed that something that's kind of surprising has happened to me is that I think I'm realizing that there's only so much I can understand intellectually about anything before I have to try to get in the mud and see what it's like.
Yep.
Because it's not this, it's really amazing how, oh, I think I understand this. And you try to do it and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, but that's part of the process, right? And that's not like the intellectual is useless. It's just that there has to be a time when you actually try to build the house rather than read about it. But I think in this sense, I would like, my goal in our studies is I'd like to get an embodied knowledge of what Vervaeke's talking about, right? I want to know how to live what he's saying for the reasons that he's talking about, which is that, the world is a total shitstorm. I mean, I know that social media exaggerates and all that, but still, right? And I see it socially around me, so I know it's not just the internet. And I would like to be one of the people that actually works, affects the system in a way for me and everyone else around me in the world, that is going to help hopefully start to heal that sort of shattering of people's ability to orient and live meaningful lives. So that's and also, of course, it's so damn relevant to my own health challenges and the people I help every day in the office. Because that's, if
Let me ask a question to that reaction. Have either one of you followed or studied his After Socrates series?
I started, but I didn't get very far because I got distracted by something else. Have you done it?
Cam, have you?
I'm the same as Michael. I started it. It didn't grab a hold of me, so I dropped it.
So I have left it aside because I have an inclination to be more abstract. So the way I take it, I have low expectation from quote unquote actionability from this series. Because I think this series is basically just a conceptual framework and laying the ground for those who care to understand the groundwork, the conceptual framework. But I think what he himself says is that after Socrates is his answer to ecology of practices and how you apply it, right? So, so my take is that after we finish doing this, and to the degree in parallel, we are doing some practices, ecology of practices, those are where we will find the application and not in the further episodes of this series.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I believe that what the application that I am developing through practice with you gentlemen in these episodes that we play in, I believe, I hope, have to do with being able to speak the appropriate words in context, such that I'm aspirational the same way that you are, Michael. And by the way, for whatever it's worth, that's how I experience you as one of those agents who is, you said healing. I think there's other words in addition to healing, but the point's well taken. So Anurag, I think you just said, for those who care to understand how the process and understand in a propositional sense and develop the skill to be able to speak the words such that I can serve as coach. I'll put it in the frame of what I'm doing with Evolve Move Play. It's essentially I put myself out there explicitly as a coach. Well, the coach is practicing that agapic mode where the participant may or may not actually know why they have come to you, regardless
right.
of what they say.
Mm-hmm.
So everything matters in those contexts. Everything matters. The words might not be the most important thing. The coherence of the speech may not be the most important thing, but it's not nothing. And the quality of it does matter.
Different paths for different people. Different paths. For some people, in Hindu philosophy, it's called the path of knowledge versus path of action, right? For liberation, and then there is path of devotion. So there are multiple pathways to the same end game, right? For some people, path of knowledge is important. For some people, it's path of practice or action. Like you do yoga and you do cold baths, and that is in itself rewarding enough. You don't need quote unquote explanations for it. For some people,
I want it all.
Right?
I want to do them all.
It's a different. It's what floats your boat. What path are you inclined towards? And we are all inclined towards certain paths more than others.
But
well, so in the I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
I was just saying to Edinburgh that I definitely would be up for, after we're done with this, to go to the After Socrates and see if we can actually, he has a structure there that it may be worth knowing. I'm guessing that's what he's doing with Evolve Move Play people. Is that he found that structure in that. I mean, he was like, showed up and well, holy shit, you guys are doing all the shit that I just figured out. Like, and I'd like to be both involved in, again, embodied experience of that, which we did have the last retreat. I felt that there was a lot of really good stuff there. And I was like, Jesus, it's like, kind of a catalyst for a deeper experience, because of the way that the practices and the whole community was set up. So anyway, so anyway, I'm definitely up for that. And I was actually so funny you said that, because I've been thinking, now, how are we going to take this into further? Like, I mean, because I'm not disparaging what we're doing. I mean, this is an incredible education, but it's like application is the main deal, right? So, but that doesn't mean this foundation is a waste of time. It's not, but it's, the ultimate goal is to be able to embody it and demonstrate. Actually, this is one of my favorite quotes from a book I read years ago. To teach is to demonstrate. And you demonstrate what you believe every minute of the day, right? So that's a really profound thing that I really believe. So that's why I'm glad that you had that in mind, Andrew. I definitely want to do that. See if we can take this incredible base and then, see how he applies it. What does that look like? So there, Cam, I think you was going to say something when
I'll just say quick. I'll just put a quick plug in. Very recently, he's done a series of 3 with a lady named Vivian Dittmar, where I'll just say that I got a lot more out of those. Those were recommended by Rafe. They were actually required by
really?
the program.
Oh, I should look it up. Okay,
and they're basically like the last one, the third one. I don't know that it's more than a week or 2 old. So he met this woman who has a very unique, and she's a very powerful woman, Vivian Dittmar. And if you're looking for application, more contemporary, like I would skip the Socrates stuff and I would go straight to those. I'm not saying dismiss the after Socrates stuff at all, but I think Vervaeke's evolved a lot himself since he did the After Socrates series.
Okay, this is going to be cool.
This is wonderful. Thank you for that guidance and suggestion. We're coming up
Yeah.
on the hour, so let's do some closing remarks. Cam,
Right.
you wanna close us? We'll take turns in that.
I've probably spoken enough. I do really appreciate the opportunity to practice with you guys. I learn a lot. It's a joy. That's enough out of me.
Yeah, this is so enriching. And actually, the fact that we're doing it together is the only reason I'm probably going to get through this anyway. Because I have my, some weeks or months I'm fine, but some weeks I struggle to get to it. But then I got to meet you guys. And so that's that community thing again. It's so amazing. The accountability when you have a promise to other people is so powerful. And also the fact that each of us bring a different perspective. And I really value that. It's really interesting to see what people's filters and skills draw out of what we read. And I find that, well, that's dialectic, right? So I think that's kind of cool that we're doing that already.
I'll echo that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I don't think I would go through the whole series second time, was it not for the fact that we are connecting every 2 weeks and having this conversation. And so it's refreshing in the literal sense of the word. Like you refresh your memory, you refresh your energy and your understanding. So with that, namaste. We'll call it a quiet now, and we will see each other in a couple of weeks.
This is good.
Thank you.